No one forgets a time slip experience, a reality glitch event that often continues to puzzle the experiencer for the rest of their life. Here two Weird World viewers share their accounts of those bizarre occurrences that continue to astonish and mystify. Frontier Encounter. Rebecca, Becky for short, related a strange experience which happened to her and her brother as children in 2007. At the time, she was 12 years old, and her older brother Jeremy was aged 13 years. While interested in history, but a paranormal skeptic, she reflects that what happened to her and her brother made her a believer in time travel, and that there may be an extra dimension out there. She relates that it was a hot summer's day in the American state of South Dakota when she and Jeremy were playing around in their spacious backyard, which she says included a lot of wildlife like prairie dogs, coyote and bison. Jeremy was bigger and taller than Becky, and so she remembers jumping onto a large barrel to tower over him. But just as she climbed onto the barrel and was feeling triumphant and starting to laugh, it suddenly started to rain. She and Jeremy then heard and saw a lightning bolt, accompanied by a loud noise that made them both jump. As soon as this happened, the whole landscape changed around them. They were still self-evidently in the state of South Dakota, but it now seemed like they were in an old mining western town that you would see in John Wayne or Clint Eastwood cowboy movies. Becky and her brother could see many horses tied to hitching posts at a general store, hardware stores, saloons and hotels with no cars at all in sight. She could see two young boys on big white horses in the distance, but still no cars. Her recall tells her that if this was a movie set, you would see some cars in the background, but there were none. She now guesses that she and her brother Jeremy were in 1800s South Dakota, at least well before 1910. As luck would have it, she saw posted on a thick tree a travelling circus sign. It said, "The circus is coming to Deadwood, South Dakota on August 10th, 1873. She says that she and her brother were lucky to see this circus sign because it indicated to them both the location and the year they were in. She and Jeremy then looked around and realised that they were suddenly in the midst of a very large crowd of men and women hooting and hollering. Becky could actually smell the horse manure, cigar smoke and whiskey and observed that it was a circus-like atmosphere on a hot August day in Deadwood, South Dakota. She looked down at herself and noticed that her blonde hair was still long, but it had a big pink bow tied at the back. She was wearing a pink dress and was barefoot. Still standing on the big barrel, she looked down at her brother Jeremy, who was now wearing a brown newsboy cap on his head, a brown suit and short pants. He too was barefoot like herself. Their clothing had strangely turned into 1800s outfits. In all the commotion, they both looked straight ahead to realise that there was a hanging in progress at the town square. She did not get the name of the condemned man, but he was to be hanged for a list of crimes which were read out and included homicide, rape, robbery and horse stealing. She extrapolates that the prisoner may have even been caught by the famous lawman at the time, Seth Bullock, who was a Rough Rider and friend of Teddy Roosevelt, who was not yet president at this time. Becky observed the prisoner's face and describes him as a good-looking man in his 30s with a handlebar moustache and wearing a brown three-piece suit. The hangman was an elderly, thin gentleman wearing a black top hat and black three-piece suit. The executioner asked the prisoner if he wanted to say anything before he was hanged, and the prisoner replied simply, "No." The hangman placed a rope around the prisoner's neck and a big black hood over his face. He then pulled a lever when the trapdoor opened and the prisoner fell through. Becky and Jeremy were watching the man writhe like a fish out of water when she suddenly felt someone gently touch her hand. She looked around in surprise to see an enormous heavy-set man with a walrus moustache wearing a derby hat and suit that looked too small for him. The large man asked Becky and her brother to leave this public hanging, saying that it was no place for kids. Becky nodded her head to him as he started to help her off the barrel. But, she says, while he was in the process of doing this, she saw a lightning bolt streak across the sky, and before she and Jeremy noticed, they were back in the present day again. The two children looked around and at each other, shaking their heads and not believing what they had actually seen. They then went home and told their parents their story. Their parents did not believe them, and neither did their friends, save for a soul friend of Becky's called Charlotte, who always trusted her. Another strange aspect of this event was that she and Jeremy were gone for about an hour. However, to their parents, they had only been gone for about 2 minutes. She and her brother still cannot explain this slip in time, but it has made her more accepting of the paranormal. She's gratified that at least Jeremy also witnessed the experience of Deadwood, South Dakota in the 1800s, not just her. Real life reminisce. Marcus relates that his brother Ed loves antiques and collects curios from old cars, motorcycles, carnival rides, as well as tools from the late 1800s to early 1900s. While coming back from a trip to Dallas, where he had gone to check out an old car, he came upon a small store just off Interstate Highway 35 and decided to stop in as it had an old-fashioned appearance. For instance, it had a clapboard porch with rocking chairs, some barrels with items that were on sale, and an old screen door which slapped shut as he entered through it. Ed found the store to be stocked full of antiques and couldn't believe his eyes as the prices were very low. He observed an elderly man tending the counter and watched him meticulously wrap merchandise in brown paper, then used twine to finish wrapping the parcels. The man acknowledged Ed but stayed busy organising shelves. The entire store had wooden floors, and there was a middle-aged woman sweeping the floors with a wooden broom that appeared very old-fashioned, and yet the broom looked like it was new. Ed didn't notice any other customers, while the two shopkeepers went about their business and paid no particular attention to him as he navigated the aisles of shelves fully stocked with goods. Behind the old man there appeared to be an antique calendar with a picture of a blonde girl with rosy cheeks. Ed tried to make out the date but couldn't get a clear view as other items were pinned on the wall. He could make out a 195 but could not see the last number. As he continued walking towards the back part of the store, he began to notice a haze that appeared to glow like amber. The orange glowing haze seemed to surround him, and instantly he felt panic. A thought entered his head that appeared to be warning him not to go any further into the store, or he may never go back to his own time. He immediately turned around and steadily went back to the front part of the store, took one last look and left. As he was leaving, the haze seemed to disappear. He got back into his vehicle and went home, but has since travelled up and down this corridor of IH35, and to this date has never found this antique store again. He believes that he experienced a time slip when he travelled back to maybe the mid-1950s. He feels the merchandise was from the 20s, 30s and 40s, which in the 50s would not be antiques, just dated for that period. Marcus's brother Ed seems to have a propensity for time slips. He told Marcus that one day he planned to return to an old apartment building where they used to live in 1966, as he was missing those good old days and wanted to see what the neighbourhood looks like and to reminisce. As this would involve a 2.5-hour drive, and with the high price of gas, Marcus didn't believe he would bother, but months later in 2012 they caught up and Ed seemed to be in a very good mood. He told Marcus that he had finally gone to where they used to live and seemed surprised as the place looked the same. He had even run into some school friends who were glad to see him again after all these years. However, something strange happened as he walked the block to where the apartment building was located on the corner. As he reached the corner, he was bumped into by a young man rushing to get into the building. As Ed turned to see this young man, he was staring at the spitting image of their father as a young man in his 20s. Ed slowly started to say, "Dad," but the young man, of course, did not recognise Ed, being in his late 50s and with grey hair and beard. Ed stood there in awe for a moment, then thought, "No, I'm just seeing things," and soon returned home. A few weeks went by, and Marcus relayed the story that his brother had shared with him with another relative who had also lived in the apartment block in 1966. He said that it was impossible that Ed had seen that building, much less the neighbourhood. He said that in 2004, the city had commissioned for that whole neighbourhood to be razed to the ground and make room for a much more modern development, with new homes to be built there. Marcus was surprised to hear him say this. Within a few weeks, another relative had passed away, and he needed to travel through this very neighbourhood where they had lived in 1966. He was finally shocked to see that nothing that Ed had seen was there. Their old apartment building was gone, and the road was even closed, as a whole new neighbourhood had been built, with new roads and new homes. He later told his brother that he believed what he had experienced was a time slip, and that he had encountered their father in 1966 when their dad would have been in his 20s. This really shook up Ed, who now also believes that he did experience a time slip.